Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. This week, I spoke to filmmaker and editor-in-chief of the industry newsletter, Gabriel Miller. Gabe's edited projects starring the likes of Beyonce, Robert Downey Jr., Keanu Reeves, and Lady Gaga. He's worked with GQ, Vogue, L'Oreal, Showtime, Spotify, and many, many more. This is a good one if you want to be an editor. Gabe talks about how he got into the industry, what it's like working with big brands, and also some advice on his workflow and how he gets his projects done. Enjoy. I'll start off as I start off with a lot of people and ask you, did you go to uni? Did you study? But what sort of training have you done?
Yeah, I ended up going to New York University. That's what ended up bringing me to New York, where I currently live. So yeah, I did NYU undergrad film school.
Cool. And how much do you think that prepared you for the real world?
I thought it was a really interesting program, actually. What I loved about the first 2 years of the program, which were my favorite, was the first year. And the thing is, I came into NYU having done a bunch of short films stuff in high school, but not really having any kind of proper education or training around filmmaking.
Mhm.
And what NYU did that I loved was in the first semester, they had a photography course. But what that prepared you for was the basics of lenses, ISO, shutter speed, frame rate, all that, like aperture, all those things that I didn't really know existed before then. It
Mhm.
just kind of like dialed you into understanding how each of those choices affected like the creative decisions behind image making. So you would pretty much do these like photo products, but then also like films that were just like in La Jetée-esque, I guess, where it's just like photo films, right? Where it's just of still photos.
Mhm.
So that was fantastic. And then the second semester they flipped it and it was just audio dramas.
Oh
And we
wow.
learned about sound design. And that I actually found much more influential in my own filmmaking because I mean, I think is hopefully most people realize that the sound design is almost more important than the visuals. I mean, people will sit through bad visuals, but the second that the sound is often the slightest, you'll have people walk out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Amen to that. That is funny. I did a lecture the other day about this, and I always put that sound is so important. And often when you're doing, when you're studying or you're doing a student film, it does get kind of, it's the less glamorous, isn't it? Of the getting the lenses out and the kit, the sound
Yeah.
sort of comes secondary, and you're just missing a whole, like half the film and half of the storytelling capabilities. You're just ignoring them. So
Mhm.
yeah, can't stand by that enough. That's a good tip already there. So how did you go from leaving uni to now doing all brand stuff, magazines, fashion video, all that kind of stuff? What got you into that?
Yeah. The commercial stuff that I've done, it was through a series of negative experiences working with clients, actually, which
Oh,
actually
right.
started in no, yeah, it started in college, right? Because the thing is, as someone coming to New York for the first time, I didn't come to New York with any kind of connections in the industry, right? So I was like, let me just take on every project that I can get my hands onto. And I think the first kind of big opportunity I got was actually freshman year in college. And I ended up getting to do this music video for this guy that won a Grammy. So
Mm.
I was like very excited about this, but I think I sent this guy a contract and I think we were going to try to do the music video for like $300 or $400, right? Something that was just like pennies on the dollar for this guy. And he came back saying, like, Gabe, one, like, I'm not going to send you any money. You're like an unproven, filmmaker, and I've won a Grammy over here. Pretty much like kind of lording over you, like. And he said, and how unprofessional of you to send me a contract. He's like, I've been in the business 25 years. Like, what have you done? And it was this really crazy thing that just I was like, I don't understand why this guy like is doing this, but it was because he was just trying to exploit me. But I did this music video and it ended up going on the Huffington Post, which at the time, this is back in 2010, 2011, was definitely like a cooler place to be on. So that was really cool. And when that got a little bit of press, I ended up doing a number of other things. I mean, the next thing I ended up doing was actually an internship at the Weinstein Company.
Oh, wow.
This is
Okay.
2012, yeah. And
Yeah.
for that, I was being paid $1 an hour because that was
What?
like, yeah, yeah. It was a $10 per day stipend. So, and I would work 10 hours a day. And
Nuts.
that was really nuts. Yeah, I had a few bad experiences there. I remember I got brought in First day on the internship, I'm like really excited. I'm like, well, what am I going to be doing? And they said, well, Gabe, you're going to be working for this woman, Meryl Poster. I'm like, well, who's Meryl? Well, it turns out Meryl's produced Chicago, Chocolat, Slater House Rules, some of like the OG like Weinstein Miramax films. Uh, and I said, okay, like, what am I going to be doing for Meryl? They're like, well, Gabe, Meryl's assistant is in the hospital, actually. I was like, oh my God, why? They're like, well, because of a stress related aneurysm. I'm like, okay. They're like, well, Gabe, you are now her assistant. So I became an executive assistant at Weinstein Company day one of my internship, and they sat me down at Meryl's at the phone, and they said, Gabe, like answer the calls, transfer the calls. And the thing is, like, I think now I would have definitely kind of asked some questions around it. Okay, how do I do that? But at the time, I was a little bit nervous to ask any questions, and it also wasn't a very friendly environment.
Mm.
So they just kind of set me off. I thought I was doing a good job. I got called back in from lunch, and Meryl goes, Gabe, my office. Go, okay. All right. So I come to Meryl's office. She goes, Gabe, did like a Mr. Zifkin give me a telephone call this afternoon? I go, Meryl, I'm pretty sure he did. I'm pretty sure I took down a message. And she goes, no, no, look, he did call and you didn't take down a message. And you need to answer my phone like a fucking human being, or you will not be answering it at all. So that was like day one of the internship. And that just kind of epitomized like the entire 8-month experience at that company. And it pretty much taught me like, one, I don't want to be working at a film production company. I want to go off and make my own films. But it was kind of like a series of these projects where I just kept getting kind of like lowballed and put in this position where I was doing a lot of work for free, where I finally ended up taking like a business course and doing some business training and just understanding like kind of like the tactics to negotiate just in a little bit stronger of a sense. And it definitely allowed me to take on some higher level, commercial projects, both like as a editor, director, producer. Yeah.
Mm. That's crazy. So you've had your own mini Devil Wears Prada style
No,
experience.
it was literally Devil Wears Prada. And the funny thing too is I've actually worked for Anna Wintour, who is the
Oh,
devil in
right.
the Devil
Yeah, yeah,
Prada,
yeah.
because I've some stuff for Vogue actually. So I've
Nice.
definitely gotten that experience as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. That's cool. So then that's a good point. So you're saying obviously the university stuff prepares you for the technical side, but there is a bit missing, which is that business acumen, kind of
Oh,
haggling, all that kind of stuff. So would you suggest people do a business course, or do you think that's available online now, or what do you think people should do?
yeah. I mean, I ended up right. I mean, it was funny. My dad ended up referring me this book called "You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bicycle at a Seminar," which is a ridiculous title, but it just kind of like walks you through some like basic business negotiating principles, and I think allows you to, I mean, pretty much the mind shift that I had, I think that was the most significant that I could definitely share, is that I stopped being a service provider. Okay, like I have a 4K camera, I have this lens, I can do this thing. It's like, what do people actually want? Is they just want a business result. So it's
Mm,
trying to like really dial down and understand like, what is the problem you're having in your business? I mean, for a commercial, like, I mean, it could be for anything, but what is the problem you're having in your business and how can I solve that and give you the best result possible, right?
yeah.
So for the music video, I shouldn't have been saying like, well, it's only $300. I said, well, if you guys want this music video to like be seen by this many people, or if you want it to get some really good press, like I can deliver that to you. Because then you're not talking about like the $300. You're talking about, well, let me get this result for you. And you're kind of reframing the conversation. I think that's what a lot of people do incorrectly, I think,
Mm.
especially when they're starting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good tip. And looking at the stuff you've done, so you've done all these like amazing projects that you've cut together. For example, we talk about editing for a minute. If you're doing a student film, micro budget, something like that, your problem is usually that you're trying to fix problems, fix issues. But what happens when you get, because I think I looked at one of your show reels or one of the reels you did for Code Nast, I think it was, and you're getting footage from presumably DOPs who are like at the top of their game, beautiful footage, tons of it. What what do you do when it's all good stuff coming to you? How do you make those decisions to make something like that, a sizzle reel based on all of that stuff when it's all awesome?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've done like dozens of sizzle reels, but the Condé Nast one is really interesting because I would say it's weird. I think with editing, it's very intuitive in terms of like, I mean, my process, I'll give you my process steps for going through footage, just so that's, because I generally, some of the higher profile projects I've done is like, I'm given, here's like 30 hours of footage and can you make it into like a 60-second sizzle reel? So typically like how I would approach that is like, there's no glamour behind it, but I watch every minute of the footage. But what I do is that I log it just by typing out the time code. So typically like people will give you like a transcript. I generally don't think it's that useful. I think it's actually more useful towards the end of the edit. But the reason why it's not that helpful is because in my mind, with every shot or audio clip, there is an inherent ranking based on the strength of its ability to be used in the edit. So when someone says like, I'm trying to think of some of the opening lines of some of the sizzles I've done that have been really powerful. I did a national commercial for Joe Biden, and the opening line of it is, "Your vote is your voice." Now, if you'd seen that on a transcript, like, "Your vote is your voice," I don't know, like like that, I would probably read over that. But the way that this guy said it was like so heartfelt. So when I was going through all these hours of footage, like I put that in red and bold. That's like my, like, I kind of color coded for like what is the most kind of significant. And then what that does is that I have a lot of documents, right? I have like all these text edit documents that are just like spread across like a few screens. And then from there, I build the radio edit. And based on the stuff that's in like red or bold, and I can kind of put that through so it can be like a cohesive story. So you build it on kind of paper first based on like the strength of the sound bites and then the visuals that are also strong. And then in terms of the editing, you just start laying it into like the musical track for the Biden thing. They'd licensed Andra Day's song like Rise Up, which is like a very kind of powerful orchestral type song. And yeah, and then it's kind of based on intuition in terms of like what shots kind of cut together. Yeah, I mean that part's like a little bit more intuitive, I feel. The other part's a little bit more analytical. The editing, I feel like, is a little bit more kind of intuitive just based on doing it for so long. But was also very important in that, I know you started talking about the Condé Nast one, but I think the Biden one is maybe a little bit more interesting because that was a project where I really tried to drill down with them with like, who is the audience for this piece? And who's actually going to be watching it. For the Condé Nast, the audience for those sizzles is generally the people that are buying the ads at Condé Nast. And this is like, hey, we've sold, this, we have like a huge reach. Like, do you also want to reach our audience? So it's like, it's very specific. For the Biden one, it was African-American voters 18 to 35 that were deciding between voting for Biden or not voting at all. And yeah, so obviously there were going to be some things like with that kind of demographic that were going to be important, some value, some shots we wanted in there, and some stuff that like just wasn't going to be relevant. But there was a really interesting question that came up during the edit where and it was like on the first call with these guys when I won the job, I asked them like, what is the thing that like has gotten this demographic out to vote? And they're like, well, Obama. I'm like, okay, yeah, that definitely checks out. So in the edit, I remember I used like a soundbite from Obama. And when I showed them this first cut, they're like, yeah, Gabe, obviously the Obama thing's got to go. And I'm like,
Really?
why? Yeah, that was like one of their first notes. I'm like, why does it have to go? They're like, well, fine, we want to kind of separate him. He's like his own president. I'm like, I understand that, but the first thing you guys said to me was like that that Obama has gotten out this demographic to vote. So why would we not include it? And eventually they came around and we ended up and it lived in the video that went out.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And typically on those sorts of projects, those sort of high level ones, how many versions do you end up doing?
The Biden one was cut over, I think I worked every day for about 32 days on that. And one of the reasons being was there were a lot of assets. So we had a 90, a 60, and a 30. And then each of those had like an Instagram, like a 9x16, like a 16x9, a 1x1. And then beyond that, each of them had different end cards. Like this ad is paid for by this organization, or I'm Joe Biden and I endorse this message. So there were 27 different versions of that commercial that ended up going out. So for that one, that I would say was definitely a little bit more refining. I think everyone was really on the same page with that one. I mean, those were the reason why, because we had a lot of conversations on the onset about like who's the audience. So everyone was like kind of aligned with the same thing. With Condé Nast, they're very decentralized. The company itself is like a lot of middle managers. So with
Mm,
Condé Nast, you'll have like 25 people that are decision makers.
mm,
So Condé Nast, like those deals will be cut over months, and they'll actually usually swap editors on them and then swap them back.
mm. All right, so here's a question for you. I always, maybe I'm making an assumption here that you might be a little bit more left leaning, seeing as you're creative. What would happen if you got given a Trump thing to cut? Could you do it? Or, I mean, you may well be into him, but would you think that would affect your ability to cut that if it was something that you didn't believe in, for example?
I honestly probably wouldn't do something that I didn't believe in,
Mm,
to be honest. Like, which it might be a position of just having a little bit more work and not needing to do that. But yeah,
mm,
I generally like for instance, like if it was like a cigarette thing, which
mm,
actually at some point, like I did get LinkedIn with yeah, like Philip Morris, I guess. I got like LinkedIn with them. But
mm.
yeah, I mean generally stuff that I'm not like that I just don't believe in, I probably just wouldn't do it. Yeah.
Wouldn't do it. Fair enough. Fair enough. One of the other things, what I was going to ask you was, what do you think, apart from technical, lots of practice, technical experience, what other attributes do you think you need in order to be a really good editor? What sort of personality traits do you think you need?
I think you have to just be very personable and empathetic because as so I'm a free like I've worked a lot as a freelance editor. I've never been at a company. And when you do that, obviously, I mean, most of the film industry is just people that are freelancers, right? So for commercials, it's like every project is kind of like a one offer. Hopefully, you form like a longer term relationship with that company, but it's a lot of different clients. But so that places a lot of emphasis on the first few calls you have with that client when they're considering you. And I think it's like it's trying to kind of understand why are you even getting the call in the first place? Because usually it's because like something has gone like very terribly wrong at the company, right? Usually they had a person that was going to do it, that's a staff, and they got sick, or they're just so overwhelmed. So like you're pretty much kind of plugging this hole that they have, right? So I think it's kind of understanding those circumstances on like a really deep level, and then yeah,
Yeah. What's interesting about that is I think some people often might assume that editing is a very kind of solo job that you can go off and do in a dark corner. But clearly, it sounds like you've got to have that good relationship with your clients in order to give them what they want and get hired again to do more work.
yeah, and it also leads to you can charge more because you have more authority, right? So like
Yeah.
you can actually talk about like the result that it's going to get, and you get involved in the creative process. So one, it becomes more collaborative
Mhm.
versus like you get to the hard drive and they're like, just cut this thing. Like you can start having conversations that are more serious about it, so that you're not just like a worker, which just goes back at the beginning to you're providing value because you actually understand like who is the audience. I mean, that's a question that I like to ask on every call at the beginning, like who is your audience? Who is this for? Because it's going to completely affect the way I do it.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Um, so the other thing I noticed on your website was that you've got development director on there. Can you explain what that means? What's a development director?
Yeah, I got hired by ABC, which like for is just like American Broadcasting Corporation in the US, but it's pretty much just like one of our like kind of big channels. And they had me put together a like a true crime series essentially.
Mm.
Uh so they handed me a log line, which was something like um people that have been accused but never convicted of crimes. And one of the cases they had was Stephen Hatfill, who was accused of the anthrax attacks on America. This was like post 9/11 when people were getting
Mm.
like white powder in envelopes, and they're like who's doing this, right? And it pretty much they traced it back to a specific lab where this like guy Stephen Hatfill worked for, and he was pretty much like accused, but they could never actually prove it. But what happened with this guy is like his home was raided on live television. His like pretty much life was completely much turned upside down. The FBI were pretty much tracking him for like 2 years straight, but ultimately the case was dropped because they had no actual concrete evidence against him. It was pretty much following cases like that. So my job as a development director was to put together a slate of like 10 cases that we could follow and research it. And I put together for these guys for ABC like a sizzle and a deck, pretty much assets so they could sell the show.
Oh, right. Okay. And is that a Is that something you'll do again? Is it something you enjoyed doing, or is it just sort of a
Yeah, I mean, it's
square
something that I
moment?
do a lot of time for my own work, right? When I'm like developing a feature film or a TV show idea, it's stuff that I've done in the past where I like for my own stuff, right? I'll put together those kind of development materials. Like obviously you've got to develop the script, you've got to develop like a one sheet, you've got to develop like a sizzle reel, you've got to develop like a deck. So it's just assets that you need to be able to hand it off to, someone that's a decision maker that can, yeah,
Yeah.
actualize the project.
All of those assets, again, this is something I said the other day, those assets are so important, aren't they? And in not only for people to understand what you're selling or what you're trying to create, but also it helps you figure it out, doesn't it? You put all that stuff together and it sort of makes it all a lot clearer. Talking to stuff you've done yourself. So you wrote and directed a short called, and I'm going to say it, The Man Who Sleeps Backwards in Time, which I watched a trailer for, which looks really good, really high-end quality stuff. Love a bit of sci-fi. So how did that come about? How did you fund it? How did you get on with that?
Yeah, so I think in 2015 I had the idea for this movie called The Man Who Sleeps Backwards in Time. So I wrote a feature film, and yeah, I tried for many years to get that project actualized. And that one of the routes that it led me to was meeting with one of the producers on this film called Swiss Army Man, which is the Daniels' first film. They just did Everything Everywhere All at Once that won all the Oscars. But their first film was Swiss Army Man. I met with one of the producers, and he was very helpful in moving the project along in terms of like, I sent him the script. He enjoyed the script. He liked the deck. And he was like, well, Gabe, do you have a budget for this? So at the time, I didn't have the budget for the feature. So I hired a line producer. Actually, this wonderful woman named Tracy Landon, who's now gone on to like be one of like the EPs of Maestro, and is like just very talented at what she does. But she pretty much broke down the script. I mean, she put together like 100-page budget for the screenplay,
Mm.
right? Which is essentially what someone considering financing it or producing it would need to do. So and then also a schedule as well that correlates with that. So I went back to him and he said, this is great, but he's like, I think you need, as a first time director, you probably need some sort of visual, like a short film or a sizzle or something that kind of sells this show, this project. So based on his kind of encouragement, and he wasn't the first person to tell me that, but he was the first person that was taking the project seriously in terms of like we'd had like a series of meetings where he just was like kind of like investing more in the project. So when he said that, I was like, I should probably just pull the trigger on it.
Mm.
So I, yeah, pretty much I wrote the short film version of the feature, and we ended up, I mean, the process of making that film was absolutely insane. Partially because it was shot in the strangest place in America, which is called it's called the Salton Sea. It's just like a very odd place outside of Los Angeles.
Mm.
And I think our location scouting day was about like 117 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, you'd have to translate that into Celsius, but it was like, yeah, it's like it's very severe.
Yeah.
Um, the other challenge too is that making a short film project in LA comes with its own series of challenges because it's very hard for people to take like a short film seriously. And something obviously I wanted was like a high level of production value, a high level of crew member that was working there. So I ended up reaching out to this producer named Liz Destro, who's produced like The Little Hours, Life After Beth, a few like Sundance projects. She was someone that knew Tracy, so I kind of got connected in through that way. She came on to executive produce the project, and from there I was able to get some producers, but it was very challenging. I remember the first producer we got. Yeah, I mean, pretty much like I had five, without going into too much detail, we had five producers separately agree to the project and then drop out over
Nice.
the course of like 10 weeks
Mm.
for various reasons. The first person was because they signed up for 4 days and then they reread the script and went, Gabe, this is your short film is pretty much like a feature. Like it's just it's too like there's too much scope in it. Like I can't help you. And then the second person came on for a week and they called me up after that week and they said, Gabe, I hate to do this, but I'm a feature director as well. And a feature project that I've had going on for a while just got greenlit. And the investors only want me to shoot during your shoot dates.
Oh.
Um, and then the third person had produced this film called Angels in the Angels and Outlaws with Luke Wilson, which went to South by. He was on for 24 hours, and then he called me up right after my first location scout in LA, and told me that he'd gotten a divorce and he
Okay.
wasn't going to be able to do the project.
Yep.
And then the fourth person uh, came on and worked with me for 4 weeks in LA and was like a bulldog. And we met up every day. And then with, I think, 12 days to go before my shoot, they called me up and they said, Gabe, I've always wanted to be a director. I have this music video and the band only can shoot during your shoot dates. So I have to drop it. And then, so yeah, with like 10 days to go, I pretty much brought on this amazing woman named Courtney Gleason, who's a producer in LA, has worked on like a bunch of projects. But yeah, and she helped me bring it through the finish line. But yeah, it was a very it was the pre-production was like fundamentally insane.
Yeah. Nothing really, really good is ever easy to make, is it? It's always, if it's going to be good, it's going to be a lot of ball ache and
Yeah.
a lot of stress. So how did you, if you don't mind me asking, how did you get that short film funded?
It was self-funded based on all the editing work that I've been doing pretty much.
Right,
Yeah.
right, okay, self-funded, that's cool. So now I wanted to move on to the industry, which is this newsletter. Is it daily or weekly?
It's a daily newsletter. We
It's a
publish
daily.
Monday.
Wow, so that's a lot of work. So daily newsletter. Tell me about it. What made you decide to do that, and tell us what it's about.
Yeah. So I was having a big problem with the way that I was getting my film industry news. I felt like it was extremely chaotic and overwhelming in terms of like the quantity of deadline, variety, indie, like just a massive amount of news that it's just very hard to sort through and make career decisions based on that. I mean, as an independent filmmaker, I'm definitely looking for who are those up and coming producers that I should be watching out for, right? Like, and it's just tough. I feel like I'm out. Yeah, I just felt like I was always behind. But at the same time, I was getting all these wonderful newsletters like The Morning Brew or The Hustle, and I was like, why isn't someone doing this for the film industry? So I pretty much started this daily film industry newsletter that it pretty much just breaks down like what's happening in the industry, from everything from industry news to, we do actor spotlights, we have a indie filmmaker spotlight, we have an international section, we have a festivals and resources section, and then we also have a space where filmmakers can kind of promote their own work as well.
Wowzers. So definitely worth subscribing to that. And if I wanted to subscribe to that, is it theindustry.net or .com? I'm trying to think of the address.
It's www.theindustry.co.
.co. Right, cool. Everyone must subscribe to that. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you want more advice from industry professionals who are out there at the moment working, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from film sets from around the world, then please do subscribe.